Good evening and welcome back to this week's episode of the Mary Trump Show strategy session. There are 140 days until the midterm elections, and I have a panel of incredible guests here tonight to answer the question: how do we ensure that Democrats and other pro-democracy candidates win and win big in November, not just holding onto their margins, but expanding them if possible? Tonight, I have with me Qasim Rashid, an attorney who's clearly invisible at the moment, a human rights activist and candidate for Congress in Virginia, or he was actually a candidate in Congress in Virginia, which is how we got to know each other. And he's also the author of The Wrong Kind of Muslim and Talk to Me, Jen Taub, law professor at Western New England University School of Law, and author of Big Dirty Money, The Shocking Injustice and Unseen Cost of White Collar Crime. Jennifer Rubin, esteemed Washington Post columnist and journalist, and author of the book Resistance: How Women Saved Democracy from Donald Trump. I have three authors with me. All of those books are worth reading. Thank you guys so much for being here. I'm sure Qasim will join when he can. So it would be remiss of me not to start out talking about these hearings today and talk about them in the context of 2022 midterms, because I hear a lot of cynical people saying they're not going to move the needle. First of all, I think they're worth having no matter if they move the needle or not. This isn't about the midterms. This is about holding people accountable and the future of American democracy. But Jennifer Rubin, I want to start with you and get your sense of how you think these hearings are kind of making a much broader case than we might have expected. They're not just going after two or three people. They're not just going after a party. They're going after a culture, essentially, in which attacking poll workers is totally cool. Lying to get your way, cheating, stealing, etc., is not a line that they are worried about crossing. So I'm curious what you think, because I think today in particular, in today's hearing, those things became very salient.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm a long-time listener, big fan. I think today was a perfect example of how powerful and surprising these hearings have become. Just when you think you've heard it all, you realize you haven't. And they do that in a very sophisticated communications strategy. They bring in each time some new and startling evidence that the plot was worse than you thought, the people involved were operating in worse faith than you thought they were. And that was really exemplified in the introduction and the testimony of Rusty Bowers, who knew Arizona was such a blatant example of election fraud and an attempt to defraud the United States. So on one hand, we are always learning something. And by giving that to the press, they figured out, that's how you get the press to report it. You give them a new little bit of nugget each time and let them talk about that. And so not only are people watching and listening, but they're talking about it on social media. We're talking about it. They're talking about it on sports radio. They're talking about it on Instagram. They're talking about it wherever it is. So they create a conversation, which is exactly what we need to have, a conversation about this. And I think the other part of what they have done is they have really made the case Trump's actions were not victimless crimes. It's not sufficient to say, well, it all worked out, it didn't work, all's well that ends well. What we heard today were really the story of how he and his mob destroy lives, how they threaten people, bully people, intimidate them, ruin their careers. And that is the markings of a fascist regime. That's what fascist governments do. They use violence and intimidation together with extreme propaganda to manipulate the populace so that they don't have to win at the ballot box. They can rule through intimidation, through violence. And what we saw in the incredibly moving testimony today of Lady Ruby, let me get her name right, and her daughter, was a vivid description that it's the little people who bear the burden. Mike Pence was always going to be fine. He had the Secret Service around him, and he will be fine in the future. The people who are not fine are the little people, the little victims, if you will. And I use little not to demean them, but to reflect how they think of them, how Trump and his ilk think of them as inconsequential little barriers, people to be targeted, people to be written off. And that, I think we really got a taste of. And that's why it's so critical that he be prosecuted. We put a target on the backs of all of us by letting this kind of behavior, exactly what you said, Mary, this culture of violence become normalized and become the baseline. And I understand that Merrick Garland was in Poland today. It's a shame. I hope he was watching the hearings. Perhaps someone in his office was. Because if ever there were an argument for why we need deterrence, why we need to hold these people criminally accountable, I think today was it.
Yeah, that is such a good point, and that's where I wanted to go with you, Jen Taub. I'm gonna call Jen Taub Jen and Jennifer Rubin Jennifer. Okay. But just quickly, because I'm so happy you're able to be here. Thanks for coming.
Good to be here. Great group.
Yeah, lots to talk about. Jen was one of the panelists on my live stream of the hearings today. If you haven't listened, everybody should go check it out. It was a really powerful panel, I thought. And we were talking about, or we started to talk about what Jennifer just mentioned, Jen. And I said, Mike Pence did his job, sure. But he, as Jennifer said, surrounded by Secret Service, and then went right back to being the traitorous little lickspittle he is all in and on Donald's side of things. And again, remember, he was doing his job after not having done his job. Shaye Moss was doing her job after having done her job for a decade, proud of doing her job. And her job was in a nonpartisan way to help people vote and to make sure that the elections she was part of were free and fair, regardless of what her own political leanings. And that's traditionally what election workers in America have done. So seeing how devastated they were, and just back to Jennifer for a second, I read your book, and I know you were the object of some of Donald's tweets. He said what he said about me, but again, very different circumstances. These are women whose lives were essentially destroyed. And I can't think of a more chilling and more moving example of the real life consequences of what happened on January 6th and the months leading up to it, and certainly the months after, Jen.
Yes, and thank you for having me again, Mary. I guess you're not tired of me. One thing you might not know, and Qasim might not know, is that Jen Rubin and I have met before now. And in fact, although I have seen her in person, I think last time we Zoomed together was on election night. And we stayed on until, we do we were really freaked out, actually, because, that we didn't know. But when Arizona was called, I was doing all the math, and I was like, okay, it's okay. This is going to work. And I think this, Donald realized probably the same thing.
Right. By the way, I'm inviting you now for election night. So all of you. So.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know if the guy who has the handle, Daniel, I forgot what his name was. He did all the maps. and so I could do all my counting. So I'm going to have someone else who's got it all pre-counted in advance. But
Okay.
yeah, no, I mean, today, especially when you think about Shay Moss and Ruby Freeman, I mean, what a last name. I mean, Freeman, you think about who these women are literally and how they represent our democracy, and they are the future of the Democratic Party, and how honorable, how much suffering. I mean, to see the courage, to see Shay, even before she was sworn in, how afraid she was to be there, right? But she showed up, and what that is to be shut in. She talked about the effect it took on her health, all this, and yet she's still coming forward and braving that. And, she's had to quit her job. And look at Mike Pence just the other day, just to compare it. He's what a coward this guy is. He cares more about his dream to run for office than he
Delusion,
does.
actually.
And that it's just what a liar that when he was asked about Biden, he said, no one in my lifetime have I heard lie more than him. I mean, just come on. These are cartoon villains. The idea that anyway, but I thought, I thought today was, as Jennifer says, they figured out how to drop one little bit of information each time. And I was blown away today by this hearing, along with the others that preceded it, and how we are getting this legal, this factual, and this emotional communication that was so moving today. And I can't wait till the next one.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like a day off in between, and luckily we have one. I think that was one of the smartest things they did, was to postpone last Wednesday's hearing, because I think it's like a body blow, because Qasim, even though we don't know all of this, and the new information is incredibly riveting and damning and chilling, but we've known a lot of it, but somehow to see it laid out like this, to see how close we came, and to see, again, the consequences to people who actually did their jobs in real time, unlike the vast majority of the people testifying, with the exception of everybody today. It is, on the one hand, it's I understand why people numb out. It's very hard to. I was a basket case for about an hour, the last hour of these hearings. And yet we need to stay connected to this. We need to stay tuned in. But my question for you, other than I of course want to know what you think of the hearings, is what is it going to take? I literally, that's one of the things that's sort of blowing my mind. We'll talk about the Democrats and what they need to be doing a little bit later, but just in terms of the American voter, I mean, do high gas prices and inflation really, if you'll forgive the expression, trump everything else, including the violent attempt to overturn the government, and the crime and the cruelty?
Well, I mean, first of all, it's always awesome to be with these amazing thought leaders. So thank you for having me be part of this group. For me, this goes back to the birtherism back in 2010, 2011, and how the Donald was dismissed as some kook, which he was and is, but people of color, women, sounded the alarm at that time. I remember Keith Ellison sounded the alarm, and he was laughed at on live television, saying that this guy could win the nomination and anything could happen after that. And then there were the op-eds saying, don't worry, the systems will hold, the checks and balances will hold. Don't worry, this is not going to get worse than it is right now. And obviously, all of us who were told that they won't hold were called the maniacs and the alarmists and the people who were fear mongering, and the sky is falling and Chicken Little and all the names that we were called. And so my fear with these hearings being delayed as long as they were, to your very important question, Mary, of what will it take, was that people are going to have tuned out. They're going to say these don't matter. It was too long ago. People have short-term memories, and I think that's what the GOP was trying to do, or hoping for. But the one silver lining that I'm seeing, in addition to all the amazing testimony and just the really wonderful job that the January 6th Commission has done is the recent poll that said 60% of Americans want the Donald to be prosecuted, which is fantastic and incredible, because when you just put it in perspective, I put it in the perspective of an election. Let's say Joe Biden won with 60% of the vote, or Obama or any politician wins their election, you would call that a landslide. You would say that's a slam dunk. It's a mandate. It is undeniable positions from the American people. And so that's, I think, what is going to need to happen. The American people need to stay engaged. They need to recognize that this impacts us, no matter who you are, no matter what your background is. Unless you are the Donald, it impacts you. I mean, it was humorous to watch him throw his own daughter under the bus, but that's just who he is, right? That's just what he's going to do. And so my hope is that people recognize that this is that time. And I might get hate for this, but I don't think the GOP is our enemy. I think apathy is our enemy, because when you're apathetic, it allows evil forces to come in and do whatever they need to do. And so, you know, the GOP, if it's not the GOP, it's going to be in some other party. The way I look at it is that our standard has to be justice, and the GOP is the party of now. So from that perspective, if you want to pinpoint that, yes, you absolutely can. But I don't want to let folks think that, you know, let's just come out and vote on this election and then thank God we won, now it's over. No, that apathy can pull us right back into this over again. And so the 2020 election was the most important election of our lives. Well, guess what? Now the 2022 election is the most important election of our lives. And then the 24 election is going to be the most important. So I think that's what's going to take. It's going to take people working together, activating, mobilizing, organizing, and then transformationally organizing to ensure we're truly protecting our democracy.
Yeah.
You know,
go ahead, Jennifer.
You know what's amazing to me? The GOP had and still has a choice. They can have the legacy of this moron, this thug, this usurper of power, or they could have the legacy of Ratzenberger, of Sterling, of Bowers, and they choose Trump. That's what's so stunning, is they are being given a lifeline, and I think very intentionally by Liz Cheney and others, to say, you know, you guys don't have to be the bad guys. Be the good guys. All the people who stood up, all the people who are coming through this hearing, at least, of course, the Democrats stood up, but the people who are exemplars of public service and integrity are all Republicans. And the Republicans collectively say, the heck with them. We like this guy. That's what's so stunning, is that their moral bearings have been so discombobulated that, given the opportunity, the invitation to do the right thing and to choose a different path, we'll stay with the thug. And that's what's so dispiriting, what's so disappointing. And I think it's only when Trump is seen and his ilk is seen as losers, whether they're losers in jail, whether they're losers in election, does that change. Because Trump, as you know, Mary, benefited from this sense of power he could give people, the sense of sort of importance and of virility that he could instill in his supporters because they were with him. And if he can be rendered a little meek, you know, orange in orange guy, then, you know, perhaps that will change. But it is stunning to me that the degree to which the committee obviously has thought this through, has obviously decided they're going to target not only Democrats, independents, but soft Republicans. And you still have Republicans saying, forget it, you know, we'll stay with the treasonous bastard.
Yeah, I think that has a lot to do with the fact that there is a significant minority of people in this country who were thrilled when they were given permission to be their worst selves. And as you all know, typically that portion of society is isolated, or at least muted somehow, and not given any real power. But between 2017 and 2019, they were represented by about 100% of the federal government, empowered. The disease metastasized, and here we are. I just want to say a quick thing about what Donald did, which we could have predicted, of course, he's going to throw anybody under the bus, including his children, if they don't toe the line. People focus on the fact that he said she had checked out. What he really did was accuse her of perjury. So that's important because, and this is my personal block. We know so much about what a horrible human being he is and how cruel he is to people that he shouldn't be, that he knows that people in his life that to whom he is just unbelievably awful, doesn't seem to sway a lot of people, but I think that it's worth paying attention to. Like if he's going to go after Ivanka, everybody hold on to your hats, right? So Jen, we see that one of the strategies here is to call mostly Republican. In fact, I think in terms of witnesses, not just people giving, there have been some committee, I guess they're aides to the committee or whatever, sort of giving explainer videos. But with that, the exception of that, every single person until Lady Ruby and Jay Moss has been a Republican. Today, for the first time, we had 3 Republicans who actually did the right thing in real time, unlike everybody else who's testified. And I think that's important because it's important if we want to make the case that this is not just Rudolph Giuliani, John Eastman, and Donald Trump. But even with these 3 today, and again, I'm grateful to them. I admire their standing up, especially since they did it in the moment and gave forceful rebuttals to anybody who was threatening them or their families or their staff members, etc. But they all voted for Donald, and that gives me pause. Jen, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I mean, they did vote for him and his policies and what he represented in November, but they didn't. But when it came to December and January, they weren't willing to, to undermine their own oath of office or their love for the country to keep him in power. So I do think that's a distinction. Yeah. The problem is whether they would vote for him again if he were the candidate in the future. And I think that they would. I don't know for sure. That's what Bill Barr, who did the wrong thing at the time. Oh, go ahead, Mary.
Well, I just want to shift focus for a second because we don't know who they would vote for. I guess my point is that I think we need to be really careful going forward about those with whom we make common cause. Because again, these people are light years beyond any of the other Republicans who've testified, certainly the Republicans who've refused to. But a lot of what they support, getting rid of voting rights, for example, being the most crucial one, and that would include Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, that's a large part of the reason we're here, right? So I guess I don't know what we can do about it, but I just think it's worth highlighting. No.
I mean, I think it's very important. And I think I can, forcefully say that I'm quite concerned because we can take the guy from Arizona, Cutler, right? Is that who it was? Brian Cutler, who just, is that his?
Bowser.
Oh, shoot. It was the Georgia
You were
guy.
Close.
Anyway. Yeah. So Rusty Bowser, sorry. That, there he is, an honorable person, but my understanding is he's also been working, he doesn't want to win by cheating, but he's fine with winning by making sure the rules disfavor people who would vote against his candidates. And
also
to me, that's just creating a game that's unfair, right? I don't like that either, of course, right? So I don't know how we, that's a problem. It's to overcome all of this is almost overwhelming because this ties back to what Jennifer Rubin said, which is part of yes, part of the reason why this sort of clean glass of water that they're presenting and saying, why are you drinking from the sewer with your candidates, is because the base, the people who are excited about getting out to vote, this sort of, QAnon sort of, I don't care about government, I want my taxes cut, that very rabid sort of angry base is what they actually need, and they're not gonna, people didn't want Jeb Bush, it turns out. People didn't want, what's the guy from Ohio who's like a decent guy?
DeWine?
No, who ran for president? I'm trying to think of
Kasich.
Kasich.
Yeah. People don't want that, right? That's not what the Republican Party went from Tea Party to Trump to QAnon, and that's who the base is. So they have no choice but to embrace that base if they want to win in their primaries. So this is like they're kind of, so even though and so that if you look at what are the policies the majority wants, we have a resurgence of an interest in union membership. We have, when you give referenda in the states, people want their $15 hour minimum wage. What people seem to want, the country is kind of a little bit in turmoil about how we see ourselves, right? And so, Liz Cheney is trying to hold on to that, her vision of that old traditional Republican Party, which there's just not a bet for that anymore. So I don't know, all we can do now, I think, as Democrats, or people who would prefer to have Democrats in office than any brand of Republican, is we have to motivate the base, get out our vote. And that's only done by showing strength and conviction for our party's policies. We have to get out the vote in a way that we've never done before. Because
I also think we have to put the Liz Cheney's feet to the fire. The Washington Post, which employs me, did
Full disclosure.
What every newspaper should be doing, which is explain why this matters. Over 100 people who are election deniers are running for office, many of them for positions where they're going to be counting the votes or ruling on counting the votes or have some connection with that. What is Liz Cheney prepared to do about them? Will she come out against them? Will she either make common cause with the Democrat or suggest a write-in vote that might split the Republican vote? What is she really prepared to do? Because if she's just going to keep her mouth shut, then she is undoing what she said she was all about. She said she'll do anything to stop Donald Trump from reclaiming the presidency. Well, what about all these other people who are reclaiming offices based upon the same philosophy, the same election denial? So what are they going to do? And that's kind of been my, little tweak that I've been keeping up. What are they prepared to do? If they won't support Donald Trump, why are they supporting Jim Marchant, who's the Secretary of State candidate in Nevada, who's a complete election denier? So
it's such a good point. And Qasim, I want you to follow up with that. But before we do that, I want to go back to something Jen said about the Republican base and highlight the fact that today the Democratic base showed up, spoke truth to power. And once again, it's Black women saving our asses, putting themselves on the line, literally putting their lives on the line. And still, I feel that the Democratic Party does not give enough, does not honor its base. It does not empower its base to the degree it should. They take their base, which is, again, primarily Black women, people of color, for granted until it's election time. And meanwhile, and I have to, again, Jennifer and I were talking about Republicans and language before we started. And I just realized I fell into that trap. And the media also do this. We kind of say the Republican base, the Democratic base, as if they're equivalent things. They are not. So that is part of the problem too. Like the Republican base has talked about, like it's this legitimate entity that it isn't out to destroy America, whereas it is. So I just wanted to make sure that we kind of honored that and honored what was represented today. And then kind of, as Jennifer suggested, kind of push back against Republicans who seem to be showing up now, but may not be willing to go all the way that needs to go as far as they need to go, right? And like, let's forget how they voted in the past. Doesn't matter right now. What are they going to do going forward? And why isn't Ginny Thomas being hauled in front of this committee? And I think those two things are related.
Yeah, I mean, Jennifer made a really interesting question a couple of comments ago, that the GOP has a choice between Donald and between some sense of normalcy, even if we don't fully agree with people like Kinzinger and Cheney, and I certainly don't. I certainly hold them accountable for voting against voting rights and the Equality Act and other critical bills, minimum wage that we need to pass. But, you know, I think everybody here knows Dean Obeidallah, and he's got a great line that Donald is not an aberration of the GOP. He's a manifestation of what they've always been. There was a poll done of Republicans, and 57% want the United States to be based on the Bible, not the Constitution, the Bible. And this is not a poll from 2022. This is a poll from early 2015. And so we're talking that this has been in the works for a decade. And someone like Donald comes along, pretends to be a Christian, and pushes this forward. And so I think the reason why the majority of Republicans now aren't willing to kind of pull back and say, maybe this is not what we wanted, is because the scary version is this is what they've wanted all along. And they're not willing to give up what ground they've made on the Supreme Court. And in, as you pointed out, Mary, bringing these people to office, I'm sorry, Jennifer, bringing these 100 folks to office who will select whoever they want as the winner, irrespective of what the actual vote count is. And that's why, you know, going back to Mary, your point about the Democratic Party and our base, we're a minority-majority party. Yep. By any definition, we're a minority-majority party. Meanwhile, 79% of elected Democrats are white and 65% are men. That's not a minority-majority representation. And so it's going to be impossible for there to be meaningful accountability for a party that is 98% elected white and I think something like 89% elected men, when the opposition party isn't truly listening to the needs of the base, not listening to Black women, not listening to immigrants, they're not listening to the people from the disabled community, they're not listening to leaders in the LGBTQ community beyond a tokenization. And I think that's where kind of the rubber meets the road. For there to be meaningful accountability, we need to have leaders in the Democratic Party that are reflective of the needs and demands and wants of the people of the Democratic Party.
Yeah, I could not agree with that more. So let's shift gears a little bit. We, as I think is fairly obvious at the moment, seems like the Democratic Party has both hands tied behind its back. One, because of structural inequalities in the Senate, the Electoral College, the way voter suppression has gone, and now, of course, the Supreme Court. But we can't talk about that because I'll start crying again. Because apparently there's no such thing as separation between church and state anymore. And that's just today. And then the other hand tied behind her back is tied behind her back by the mainstream media, which seems not prepared for this moment. So clearly we're fighting an uphill battle. But what doesn't seem necessary or inevitable, Jennifer, is the extent to which elected Democrats don't seem to understand the urgency, because they are the only people who can make this, can turn this around, right?
Right. It's remarkable to me that at this moment of peril for democracy, the president of the United States, who's essentially the leader of the Democratic Party, is still talking about bipartisanship, is still talking about Mitch McConnell being a rational person. what that does is it completely saps the energy and the entire message of this election, which is you have a choice between an America that is democratic with sincere people who are trying their best to work on problems and this crazy violent bunch of thugs. And when Biden does that, he destroys that. He equalizes the Republicans. He treats them like a normal party. And I cannot for the life of me figure out why he keeps doing it, other than the fact is he's 78 years old and this is the way he's always talked and this is the world he grew up in, and he hasn't figured out that that world hasn't existed for a very long time. And it's very hard for a party that has the White House to, in essence, run against the message that the president of the United States is putting out every day, which is, oh, look at all these great bipartisan things I did. Oh, look, we can have bipartisanship. Look, we can lower the temp. All this, hooey. No, it's the opposite. This is bizarro world. And the message Democrats have to get it across is this is a choice between sanity and insanity, between elections and violence, between democracy and thugocracy. And unless they're able to make it that clear, they're going to get killed. For one thing, Republicans, will just, scream inflation, 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 even though they don't have any solution for it. And for another thing, they'll just enjoy the cover that they're getting because they're being treated like normal politicians. Why not vote for one of these guys? Just another politician.
Absolutely. I think I say this every show because it drives me crazy and it's so true. The media treat the Biden administration like a normal administration that followed another normal administration. That's bad enough. And that's why people can think inflation and gas prices are the most important things, even though nobody seems to explain to them that presidents really can't do anything about either one of those things or only to a small degree. When the administration itself treats things like they're normal, that is seriously problematic. I mean, maybe people will disagree, but I think I've been saying for a while that bipartisanship is to make common cause with fascists at this point. And I had Ruth Ben-Ghiat on recently, and she's started referring to the Republican Party as a party of fascists. So I'm in very good company. She knows a lot more about this stuff than I do. So, Jen, it seems to be epidemic, though. Like Republicans will just call us pedophiles and groomers and go about their business. Somehow, for whatever reason, for Democrats, collegiality is more important. And we even have Justice Sotomayor coming out defending Clarence Thomas, for God's sakes. It is so demoralizing. So what do we do about that?
Well, there's two things. I can't do anything about Justice Sotomayor, but
that's true. But still, it's very frustrating.
Other stuff. Yeah, I mean, I just wish that even if Biden believes his mandate in part was a return to normalcy, there is a way to talk about returning to normalcy without whitewashing. For example, if you're driving in the car and the parent who's an alcoholic is drunk and they're driving you, it's dangerous. And you obviously want, there to be a different person at the wheel. But if you have the sober person at the wheel while the non-sober one's still drunk and smashing and breaking up things and not showing up places, you can't ignore it. The elephant's still in the room, I guess is what I'm saying. And so what Biden, I think, should be doing is another metaphor is, the cancer is not going to go away on its own. So you got to say, there was someone in charge who was doing a lot of really bad things and encouraging a lot of graft and corruption and, put some lousy people on the Supreme Court. And we need to take steps to get things back to normal. But I'm not going to pretend that you didn't see what you saw. This was an insurrection. The tax scam was a tax scam. We're not going to pretend it didn't happen, because that doesn't, then you're participating in the Orwellian nightmare, and that's not okay.
It's not, and you're right. It's like, okay, sober person behind the wheel, hooray! But the drunk lout, who's violent and abusive, is still around breaking shit up, and ignoring that is not going to solve anything. It just, and this is one qualm I have about the committee. 17 months is a long time. I think it allowed a certain narrative to take hold on one side. I think it increased the power and reach of this very dangerous movement. So it is
let me just
kind
say
of
with that metaphor.
Sure.
We also have the alcoholic saying, "I don't want treatment. I wasn't drunk. They took the keys away. They shouldn't have. Give me the keys back." It's like,
right.
Give me the keys back. They had no right to do that. And by the way, it's like also everyone are enabling it and saying it's just fine. It's totally fine. It's fine to, drinking and driving. It's just fake news that's dangerous. Also having, giving guns to kids. I mean, all of it. Like we're in the middle of this kind of world of denial about science and truth and stuff. And so again, this gets to your point, Mary, where wait a second, these folks who did the right thing, the very baseline of right thing, are also climate deniers, sexual identity deniers, like all this stuff. So I'm cool with talking about that. I don't want to give them the keys back to the car.
And we shouldn't. And that kind of leads to the next point, which is the Democrats. I'm sorry, I shouldn't laugh. I don't know what else to do though. But because seriously, they're getting called groomers and pedophiles. And they're saying, we don't want to go there. Critical race theory, we don't want to talk about it. It's not taught. We don't need to engage with that. Americans want to talk about kitchen table issues because it's the kitchen table issues right now are inflation and gas prices, which aren't looking very good for Democrats. So I don't know. I think it's pretty compelling to say children are being slaughtered in schools and they want more guns. Not only do they want more guns, they want to give guns to teachers, for God's sakes. They are going after LGBTQ plus children in a way that is alarming and should have everybody terrified. And Roe v. Wade's going to be overturned, and they're looking to make abortifacients illegal. And I mean, it's just on and on and on. And Jennifer, I think, mentioned earlier the numbers. I don't remember who said this part, and I apologize, but 60% of people now think Donald should be held accountable. Well, we got 90% of people want background checks, and 70% of people want X, Y, and Z. And guess what? We're going the opposite direction. So how do we message that? Because I don't know. Those things seem a little bit more compelling to me. That's not fair. Because obviously, I'm in a position, I'm lucky enough to have inflation not have an impact on me the way it has on most people. So I don't want to say that it isn't important. It is. However, anybody in the Oval Office would be dealing with inflation right now and high gas prices. So, and by the way, the best way to combat inflation is with a living wage. So that's another bumper sticker. But anyway, why don't these things seem to gain traction? Because there seems to be so much to work with.
Yeah, I mean, I tweeted about this the other day that it's wild to me that we buy GOP outrage on gas as $5 instead of $3.50, but then we completely excuse the GOP for keeping the minimum wage at $7.25 instead of at least $15. We excuse them for voting to keep insulin at $1,200 instead of $35 for most Americans. We excuse them for blocking paid leave and leaving it at 0 weeks instead of 12 weeks, leaving us the only developed country in the world that doesn't have paid maternal and paternal leave when a new child is born. I mean, the Democratic Party has a messaging problem. I don't think that's news to anyone. That's rocket science to anyone. I think everybody knows that. We've known that for a long time. But I think that kind of going back to my earlier point, look, and I'm saying this as a Democrat, as someone who's run for Congress, who's won the Democratic nomination for a congressional race before, a contested Democratic nomination. What I can tell you
that's how we met.
That's how we met, exactly. And you were extraordinarily gracious with your support then, and as you are now. I mean, I guess my point is, and this is the harsh truth, that until we have leadership that can feel the pain of people that they represent, Congressman Ayanna Pressley says it best: the people closest to the pain must be closest to the power, and that's simply not happening right now. A member of Congress, a Democratic member of Congress, has released a bill proposal on student loan relief. His idea: let children take on their parents' student debt. I mean, this is a guy who's worth tens of millions of dollars himself, and his idea for student loan relief is let millennials, who are already statistically ready to be poorer than their parents, first time in American history that children will be poorer than their parents, said, here's a great idea, that $100,000 in student loans that parents have, that people 50, 60, 70, 80 years old have, let's just give it to people 20, 30, 40 so that we can continue that generational wealth. I mean, generational poverty. I mean,
to be fair, though, we haven't burdened our children with enough. So,
yes.
Oh my God, that's so fucking insane.
Right.
But, I mean, these are the people coming up with ideas. They're not going to be able to articulate why a living wage is important, why you have to, I grew up in Section 8 housing. I know what it's like to work when you're 15 to make sure that you could put food on the table because you got a single mom doing whatever she can. And so you can't possibly expect people who are worth tens of millions of dollars to know what it's like to have to go through that struggle. And that goes back to what we were talking about earlier. It has to come down to a mass movement of people and just saying, I'm enough of this crap. Let's change this by making it happen ourselves.
Right. But they can't even talk to suburban college-educated women, which many of them are.
You're right.
Yeah.
That
You're right.
message should be: you are being made into the handmaiden's nightmare of a forced birth slave, essentially. Your kids are going to be in permanent danger if you don't get a hold of your government. And oh, by the way, your kid is going to be miseducated or propagandized about what America is all about. These are really simple, easy messages for college-educated women. Hello, their natural base, which they did turn out in 2020, and which they're losing once again. So even if there's someone who looks and sounds like them and is from vaguely the same socioeconomic group, they seem incapable of making that direct attack, making that sharp, decisive break. Now, I do think the media plays a huge role in this. I say that with the understanding that doesn't excuse what the Democrats are doing. They have an obligation regardless of the mainstream media. But to give you the sense of the lack of symmetry, the right wing has this docile, Pravda-like propaganda wing that will keep their people in the dark. Hearings? What hearings? We don't hear any hearings. That will never let them see the likes of a Ruby Freeman. And on the other side, you have the mainstream media, which has Republicans on their shows all the time and asks questions, tough probing questions like, and is inflation a problem for your constituents? None of the responsibility for sustaining this violence, for this lawlessness, is ever put front and center. And if it is, they wipe it away and there's no follow-up question. Right. I've often maintained that trial lawyers, not journalists, should be on the Sunday shows because then we would get some answers. Yeah. But it is that imbalance in the information world that makes it so much more difficult because their people are perfectly insulated, perfectly brainwashed, perfectly controlled. And the rest of the people are being told, oh, those people who are brainwashed aren't that bad. And the people who are brainwashing them aren't that bad. And oh, by the way, you guys caused inflation. And oh, by the way, you're for open borders or whatever else the Republican talking point is that they regurgitate. If you ever want to be horrified, sit through, as I force myself to do, the White House briefings day by day and listen to the questions that the mainstream media asks. They are regurgitated talking points that accept as truth the Republican premises. And that is frightful. So part of my mission in life is to push these people to do their effing job, to call them like they see them. Journalism
we can swear, by the way, if you'd like.
So journalism is not, Jen says it's raining out there. Mary says it's not. The job of journalism is to open the fucking window and tell people whether it's raining or not.
That's right.
And that inability to take a side of truth, because, well, the Republicans will always look bad. I wonder why that is, that if you're on the side of truth, the Republicans always look bad. Maybe that's the problem. That paradigm has paralyzed them since Trump came on the scene. And they are as paralyzed in that framework as Biden is in his, ancient world of bipartisanship, and gosh, it's just good old Bob Dole on the other side. So these are real institutional problems, and it requires that Democrats do what Republicans never have to do, and that is to the really grassroots work. That's the Latasha Brown, who has to go voter by voter, who has to go neighborhood by neighborhood, has to go state by state. And unfortunately, that's the only way we can do it, because the media's not going to do it. Political leaders are not going to do it. So it's people literally going voter by voter. And that takes huge manpower, huge effort. And when the president of the United States is telling you, well, if you lose, it's not that bad anyway, it's really pretty demoralizing.
Yeah, and we can't be. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I just wanted to echo Jennifer's really important point. And shameless self-plug, after my congressional run, I launched a PAC called Common Purpose to support more women and more people of color for office. And two of our congressional candidates, both women of color, actually, progressives running against establishment candidates, one of them won by 20 votes, the other one won by 76 votes. And it's because we were pumping emails out, getting volunteers involved in their local districts. And so every single little bit makes a difference. And Jennifer, to your extraordinarily important point, that is what, we are the ones we're waiting for to save us. It's not going to be Garland, unfortunately. It's not going to be the Supreme Court. It's not going to be the White House. It has to be us. That's the only way it's ever been throughout American history. And that's how it's going to have to be now.
Yeah. And I think that, first of all, this is going to be the first election since 2020. Well, it is the first election since 2020, period. But COVID is not going to be the same kind of issue as it was. So that'll be interesting. But Jennifer points to this fascinating thing that's going on. And, we've been talking about willful blindness a lot for obvious reasons, but it seems to be operating on other levels too. The Democrats not wanting to believe that the Republicans, elected Democrats, I should say, not wanting to believe that Republicans are just out to destroy the country. So they're pulling their punches. And that is not something that will get us to a place we need to be, not just want to be, but need to be. So, Jen, given the fact that and also the media, who again seem to think that their job is to treat both sides equally, and by equally they mean without any sense of discernment, instead of saying journalists should be objective as to the facts and biased towards democracy. That seems not to be operative in journalism, generally speaking, right now. So, Jen, willful blindness everywhere, which means that we need to refuse to be blind about what's happening and be real about what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, and I think how does that play out when it comes to building relationships well in advance of elections? I've seen Latasha Brown speak in person, and she's kind of a force of nature and brilliant, lovely person, so motivating. And, you know, she talks about if you just show up around election day, that's transactional. It's not inclusion, you know.
Right.
And again, at the same time, I've had friends reach out to me saying they're having friends reach out to them. You know, these are, you know, suburban white women who, this group of friends of my friend who have the time, the energy, maybe even the financial resources to get involved. And they don't know who to talk to or where to go. And apparently you can go to the DNC website, but to do that kind of meet with people, you know, there should be more of a template. Like, should be people having house parties now that we can get together, or lawn parties, or register people to vote parties, or what the hell, you know, people are very nervous, right? So like, Mary, there's like, I agree with everything you're saying, but there's a huge bunch of people who will vote for the candidates we hope that they would vote for, but they need to be registered, and they need to maybe update their registration because it's lapsed, and they need to have a voting plan, because it's going to be harder to vote. All the stuff that we know. And I know there are lots of people who are saying, I want to help, and they don't know what to do. And a lot of them are in swing states. It's the same story over and over again. And if I don't even know, I have no idea who to tell them to go to.
Yeah. Well, that's actually why I launched my PAC Democracy Defense Fund, to help guide people to races that are the most important if they want to donate or volunteer, because otherwise it's overwhelming, because everybody's running, you know, for reelection. Right. But you said the apathy.
Because reach out to, because there's the base voters, but there's also the white women voters who can be swung. You know, they really hated Trump, and that's why in places like Georgia, the low down ballot people won in the Republican Party, but not Trump. You know, and I think that's disturbing, because if they run a DeSantis, he's just as awful. He's banning books. He hates
worse.
He doesn't want people to get, you know, vaccines. And I think, you know, at any rate, you know, I think there's an opportunity to convince the same people who the women who voted for Biden before, to make sure they vote for Biden and their kids vote for Biden, because they understand what's going on in the Republican Party to strip away our rights.
Right.
How do we coalesce around that? Because I think those voters matter. We need to not lose them.
And that gets us back to the problem with apathy, which I agree. You know, we can leave aside what we think of Republicans right now, because honestly, it doesn't matter. I think we just need to leave them out of the equation. I have a very simple metric. Anybody who voted for Donald twice isn't worth talking to. Quite honestly, that's sort of how I feel about it. So it is inspiring people and helping them understand. And part of that is in messaging. So I have a segment at the end of every episode of our strategy sessions, which is to help Democrats figure out how to convey messages in a very concise way to their constituents, which is come up with something that can fit on a fucking bumper sticker. So I think you're all prepared for this. So I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but does anybody want to start?
I'll start.
Awesome.
Judge Luttig gave it to them. He wrote it out. Clear and present danger. Republicans are a clear and present danger, period.
And just on a personal note, is that hard for you to say, Jennifer?
Which
that
part
Republicans are a clear and present danger?
No, because I have, you know, it's been how many 7 years since I checked out of the Republican Party, and I feel with every fiber of my being that that is true, that they have become for all intents and purposes, a right-wing fascist party, and that they are a threat to democracy. Doesn't mean every single one of them, but the party as a whole. As a whole.
And that, we need more of that, because, we should all appreciate that kind of straightforward assessment, especially from somebody who came from the party and is still able to step back and be very honest about what's happening. Okay, who's next? Okay.
How about I'm with Lady Ruby?
Oh, yes. I love that. And in fact, during our live stream and our post-hearing analysis, I said, I'm going to make t-shirts. I'm going to make Lady Ruby t-shirts, and she can't wear hers anymore. And we're all going to start wearing Lady Ruby t-shirts, and I'm going to start selling them, and we're going to raise money to protect election integrity. And the way to do that would be to support people who still believe in free and fair elections, who are running for Secretary of State in vulnerable counties, because we're looking at the whole map, and I love that idea, and what she and her daughter did will go down in history, or it should. Anyway, okay, it's your turn.
I wish I could take credit for this one, but this is Congressman.
Wait a minute.
I'll own it though. It's really good. He says votes over violence. Vote for Democrats because we believe in a democracy that has votes over violence. I think that's as powerful. It's fantastic, and I like the alliteration too.
Yeah, I do, and I actually think all of these are printable. So again, we're picking the best ones. I'm going to design them and start raising money for candidates who are vulnerable incumbents, or races that are flippable. And mine tonight is really simple, and it's sort of anticipating some other Supreme Court decisions. It's literally vote while you still can. Yes. So it's a bit of a downer, but we still have that. Remember, everybody, the privilege of living in a democracy is embodied by that right. And anybody who seeks to take that right away from anybody is a danger to what we all believe in. So we can never take it for granted. And that's what we're fighting for. So it's been something of a day, I have to say, but I was grateful to watch the hearings with other people, because watching them alone would have been very difficult. And to end the day with the three of you, I have to be honest, I wasn't sure how I was going to be able to show up, because I kind of felt like we'd all been through the ringer, but you all lift me up. I admire all of you. Your work is essential, and your voices are essential. I know we're all coming at this from different directions, but that's the beauty of it. And that is the beauty of democracy. So Qasim Rashid, Taub, Jennifer Rubin, I appreciate all of what you do and who you are. Keep fighting the good fight, and hopefully you will all be back on sometime soon. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you to that incredible panel. That was such a great discussion, especially on the heels of a very difficult, emotionally draining day. So now it's time for me to read some of your bumper stickers. And I just want to let you know that I've decided that we're going to start running contests. I have a newsletter that's called The Good in Us. And we'll put the link to that in the show notes. And basically, it's just, my thoughts about what's going on in this crazy country of ours. And it's just a different way for me to communicate with people. So what I've decided to do is start running contests over there. I'll pick every week. I'm going to pick the best 5 or 10 bumper sticker ideas that you guys write in, and the winner will get a free lifetime membership to my newsletter. So hopefully that's an incentive for you. And if you go over there, you get to see pictures of my cats and my African gray and my very, very old leopard gecko. Okay, so tonight from Joan, simple to the point. She writes, democracy equals Democrats. Yes. We cannot argue with this. From Sid, think, care, vote for Democrats. That will appeal to a certain segment of the population, and it won't appeal to another. But again, the goal is not to appeal to those people who don't think that thinking and caring matter, right? We're looking to motivate people who don't typically vote or who don't have the luxury of paying as much attention as we do. There is from Dave S. There is no us in fascist. From Lynn R. Make America normal and nice again. Or I may be more normal and nicer because I'm not entirely sure how normal or nice we ever were, but certainly we can do better than this. From Lynn, that was from Lynn R. From Lynn S. Forget gas prices. It's our democracy, stupid. Yes. And from Lori, patriots vote for democracy. So please keep them coming. I love hearing your bumper sticker ideas. And again, I'm going to start doing this contest on my newsletter, The Good in Us. It's on Substack next week. So, and I'm going to go back through all of the, since we started doing this, to give everybody a fair shake. And that's it for tonight. Thank you so much to you for listening to this week's episode of the Strategy Session, and to my guests, Jennifer Rubin, Jen Taub, and Qasim Rashid. It was such a pleasure to be on with all of them. Make sure that you tune in this Thursday for our regular episode of the Mary Trump Show at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. That's at youtube.com/Politicon. And then, of course, next Tuesday, we have our next strategy session, also at youtube.com/Politicon at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. And while you're on YouTube watching, please like the episode, follow Politicon, and click the bell, because that way you'll be sure that you get notified every time not only an episode drops, but any of my quick hit videos drops. I'm starting to do more of those because there's so much flipping news that I think it's important that I sort of chime in as things are happening. So definitely check those out as well. And podcasts. You can, of course, listen to this in podcast form on Apple or anywhere you listen. And please give the show a 5-star review, because it really, really does help other people find the show. And that's it for this week. For tonight. Come back on Thursday. It's just been a really long week already, and it's only Tuesday. But I will see you in a couple of days. And in the meantime, please stay safe and be kind. Bye.